I have the wonderful task to introduce our next speaker. He's no stranger to most of you as the current president of the Eugene O'Neill Society. Katie Johnson is professor of English and an affiliate of Global and Intercultural Studies at Miami University, the original one in Ohio, with a keen interest in performance, film, theater, gender, and race studies. An avid researcher and self-confessed archive geek, she has received 2 NEH grants for her academic projects. In 2018, she received the Outstanding Article Award from the Association for Theater and Higher Education for An Algerian in Paris, Habib Benglia's Emperor Jones. She is the author of Sisters in Sin, Brothel Drama in America, Cambridge University Press, 2006, Sex for Sale, 6 Progressive Era Brothel Drama Plays, University of Iowa Press, 2015, and her most recent book, Racing the Great White Way, Black Performance, Eugene O'Neill and the Transformation of Broadway, University of Michigan Press, just out this summer. Yeah. She's now embarking on a new research project tentatively called From Coast to Coast, Racing Transatlantic Performance. She is, as I mentioned, the president, sitting president of the Eugene O'Neill Society. Please welcome Katie Johnson.
Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful conversation already with these 2 terrific presentations. And can you all hear me? Okay. After training. But if you can, just like following Roman's footsteps, raise your hand or something. So I want to really thank the organizers, Dirk Pillen, Joel Miner, and behind the scenes, Marcus, and everybody for making, everybody here for making everything so wonderful. Thank you so much. And I do want to say, if you want to continue this conversation, please join the Eugene O'Neill Society. I think it's like $25 the first time you join or something. And right now we are planning our next international conference. Is going to be in Greece in 2025, and it's going to be formed very, very broadly. So you can make anything work. Okay, come with us to Athens, and I think it would be great. Practitioners, theater artists, actors, playwrights, scholars, lover of all things having to do with theater. So following the archive, as a seasoned researcher, I think of myself as an archive nerd. My idea of a good time is a deep dive into the archive. So this event to celebrate Harley's collection is a red carpet event for me. It is my Super Bowl. It's my Wimbledon, my Burning Man. But before I do my nerdy dive, what I want to do is just kind of give a layout of my talk today. So first I want to talk a little bit about the collection, and I am going to draw from the bit of catalog copy that I wrote for the catalog, which will be seeing the collection right after this. Then I want to talk a little bit about some recent formations about archive, the tension between archive and performance. And then I'll give you a snapshot of some of the bits out of my book and how I use the archive, including some of the archive from the collection. So I've used the Harley Hammerman Collection for many things, but one of my favorite applications is the classroom. To give just one example, I worked with Harley about utilizing the collection for my senior seminar on O'Neill. Together, we hatched the idea of resurrecting English 47, the name of George Pierce Baker's famous theater class at Harvard, the first in the nation, whereby students would closely work with his archival materials to generate research papers. The very best papers were published in a special section of the online O'Neill newsletter. Oops, sorry. As another example, historical documents like O'Neill's letter to the dramatic editor of the New York Times in 1921, which he provocatively called Happy Ending, are essential to teaching the controversy regarding Anna Christie. I can't wait to see this with my own eyes. It's right across the hall, right out there in the glass case. And I will let you know, when I was talking in Danville was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I talked about the specific artifact, and I just taught it yesterday in my class, an intro to drama, because some critics faulted O'Neill for developing what they called this false happy ending. O'Neill's type letter, replete with edits and handwritten title, demonstrates not only how O'Neill defended the play, but also how his thinking evolved as he edited his own work. So not only does the collection have the original 4-typed page letter, but also a transcription of this. And given O'Neill's nearly illegible scrawl, Carlotta developed vision problems, you know, from trying to read and type up his notes. Such annotations are essential. So also in the archive, they have material on the silent film version, 1923 of Anna Christie, as well as the 1930 talkie, a radio play, and the screenplay. So most importantly, though, I've used the collection in my scholarly work, and this is what I want to turn to before I frame how we understand the archive and performance in performance studies and theater studies. And as I was thinking about these questions, I turned to, and I just taught this in my graduate seminar 2 weeks ago, Diana Taylor's wonderful book called The Archive and the Repertoire. As Taylor shows in this wonderful work, there are several myths surrounding the archive. One is that it's unmediated, that objects located there might mean something outside of the framing of the archival impulse itself. What makes an object archival is the process whereby it is selected, classified, and presented for analysis. Another myth is that the archive resists change, corruptibility, and political manipulation. Then she talks about performance, but her term for that is repertoire. It is also beset by myths, particularly because of its ephemerality. Performance are temporal and disappear, thus presenting a challenge for the archival record. But as Taylor tells us, the repertoire is a rich space for scholarly investigation. She writes, the repertoire, on the other end, enacts embodied memory, performances, gestures, orality, movement, dance, singing. In short, all those acts usually thought of as ephemeral, non-reproducible knowledge. The repertoire allows for an alternative perspective on historical processes. And really, most importantly, Taylor challenges this supposed fixed binary between the archive and the repertoire. And she suggests that it's not rigid, that both are ephemeral. If we think about link rot, if we think about all kinds of ways in which even what we think of as being steadfast, we can trouble that. And to think of performance as not only as ephemeral, but indeed as creating meaning, and that embodied action can be an archive unto itself. And that has been one of my central pursuits in the work in this book. So 10 years ago, as I began my book project, I was writing a different book, but you know, the archive kept pointing me towards O'Neill. The more I researched, the more I began to realize how many innovations and breakthroughs in American and indeed in world theater had occurred through O'Neill, often through performance practices not found on the page. Eugene O'Neill's emphasis on racial themes and conflicts, especially in his early dramas and film adaptations, opened up an extraordinary opportunities for Black performers to challenge racist structures in modern theater and cinema. By changing offensive scripts to omit offensive epithets, inserting African-American music and dance, or including citations of Black internationalism, theater artists of color used O'Neill's dramatic texts to raise racial barriers in American and transnational theater. And it's no accident that all of these actors made their mark through O'Neill's plays. Obie Aberle, Jules Bledsoe, James Earl Jones, John Douglas Thompson. We just awarded him the O'Neill Medallion last year. And Frank Wilson. The first leading actor in a serious role on Broadway, rightly regarded as breaking the color line, Charles Gilpin in The Emperor Jones. Broadway's first interracial kiss, All God's Children Got Wings. The first Black performer to break the color line at the Metropolitan Opera, Hemsley Winfield in The Emperor Jones. It wasn't, I've forgotten her name, Marian
Anderson.
Thank you. It was really he as a dancer. The first Black lead in a major, the first Black director on Broadway, Gilpin again, directing The Emperor Jones. The first Black lead in a major Hollywood picture, Paul Robeson in The Emperor Jones. The Pittsburgh Courier headline celebrating Jesse Owens' triumph at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, All God's Children Got Wings. And Denzel Washington's first role, Brutus Jones. So these artistic breakthroughs have had lasting effects beyond the stage, from Habib Benglia's involvement in the Negritude movement to Robeson's political activism. As the case studies in my book demonstrate, in spite of dichotomous and at times problematic representation of Blackness, O'Neill's dramas were utilized by Black theater artists to disrupt racial barriers within US and transnational stages and cinemas, and came to stand in as defiance. As this woodcut by Aaron Douglas, he did an entire Emperor Jones series that was published in The Crisis, which was an African-American periodical. Writing about Black experience was part of O'Neill's repeated efforts to document voices that had been mostly absent from mainstream American stages, like the Irish, Swedish, and Norwegian immigrants who populated his early plays. African-American characters were part of O'Neill's vision to craft a new American drama featuring diverse stories. His experiments with characters of color began in plays such as Thirst, Moon of the Caribbees, The Dreaming Kid, and became central to works such as The Emperor Jones and All God's Children Got Wings. His last Black character appeared in The Eyes of the Comet. I wanted the revival picture with Denzel Washington for you. Prior to these early O'Neill works, white dramatists mostly relegated African-American characters as one-dimensional servants, slaves, mammies, Uncle Toms, or tragic mulattoes, in a representational regime dominated with plays like The Octoroon by Dion Boucicault, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and The Klansman by Thomas Dixon Jr. And of course, that was the text for Birth of a Nation. The arrival of O'Neill's work was a remarkable step forward. Most importantly, O'Neill's dramas about Black life broke through because some of their innovations of modern, if not modernist, drama. Never had a Broadway audience seen a Black at the head of an all-white company performing serious drama until The Emperor Jones, end quote, writes John Monroe in his study of Black theater in New York. Indeed, he begins his chronicle of Black theater with The Emperor Jones. Despite the innovations his work inspired, O'Neill is not an unproblematic figure in the history of racism on the Great White Way. While O'Neill was the first major American playwright to write Black characters with complexity, he also relied upon stereotypes and forms of primitivism, which continued to provoke criticism. Commentary on O'Neill's work was divided on his racial politics from the beginning. Harlem Renaissance intellectuals, including Du Bois, Montgomery Gregory, and James Weldon Johnson, and Elaine Locke, praised O'Neill's portrayals of African-American characters in the 1920s, although some of them would later become more critical. In a theater world that had paltry roles for African-Americans, The Emperor Jones provided new opportunities for actors of color, promoting what Du Bois, for him to write in his 1924 essay, The Negro on the Stage, and which is excerpted actually in the playbill, some of the playbills for The Emperor Jones. And also Montgomery Gregory, who was an activist, critic, and founder of the Howard Players, who wrote, O'Neill, more than any other person, has dignified and popularized Negro drama, gives testimony to the possibilities of the future of Negro drama. Numerous Black theater artists utilized O'Neill's plays as launching pads to break through color lines and challenge what Cedric Robinson calls regimes of race on the Great White Way and beyond. So at its core, Racing the Great White Way is a book that attends to interventions by theater makers of color, both on and off the stage. It is how they raced O'Neill's dramas, with citations of Black power. So now I want to turn to what I'm calling archival errors, and actually to kind of reclaim that as something that can be productive. So my first case study is actually the cover of my book. And as you look at this image, what do you see? And Carol, you're not allowed to answer.
I have another answer for what I did a couple weeks ago.
But okay, so you've just seen all those photographs of Rosen, but what do you see?
Dining in front of a sun or moon or something.
Oh yeah, isn't it cool?
Yeah.
Really standing out, and it does make him into a bit of the character, into a bit of a hero.
Yeah.
With that portrayal.
Okay, yeah, that is really cool, and
I see Napoleon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to get out of that. Okay, do we know who this is? What were you going to say, Andrew?
The weapon is nearly taken out. He's ready to take it out.
Isn't that cool? He's like mid-motion, okay?
Right.
To pull, but what is he pulling out?
Sword.
It's a sword.
No, he's pulling out his penis.
Oh,
I mean, it's phallic.
This is
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Camera.
Not even my
phallic.
sense. Okay.
Phallic
Yeah.
object, you know?
Yes, it is phallic insofar it's a powerful symbol. Yeah, but if you know the play, does Brutus Jones have a sword? No, no. So where are we? What is the context here? It's confusing, isn't it? So what else do you see that might locate it in terms of, country, let's say?
French.
It's French,
Yeah.
right? I'm not going to use the clicker thing. He's got a Napoleon hat on,
Right.
okay? And the sword, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was doing my research, this was at the Museum of the City of New York, and it was labeled Paul Robeson in The Emperor Jones. And I was like, this is not The Emperor Jones, right? But of course, everyone thought it was The Emperor Jones because that was a role that he performed for 2 or 3 decades. He just kept performing that role again and again and again. So that was like a very curious error that I wanted to pursue more. So, and archivists get things wrong all the time, as do researchers. So so what it is a photo of is this play. Toussaint Louverture, the untold story of the only successful slave revolt in history. It's a little known play by C.L.R. James, who is a British Trinidad-born playwright. And this was recently discovered and published by Duke I think, like in the last 10 years. And they immediately assumed that because this had been lost in the archive, that Robeson was playing with this. And in fact, if you go to the website, it's still the wrong listing, even though I told them that this is, this is not right. They're like, okay. So why are these two things collapsed? It actually was central to my argument that the Emperor Jones, so O'Neill sort of started, not just only for Robeson, who's performing these rules that are about powerful rulers, right, who have, okay, a short-lived moment of rule because they're overthrown and then killed, but nonetheless, that they're citational. And this is where notions of performance theory and citationality are very crucial. So Robeson stepped into the role of Louverture, having performed Brutus Jones for over a decade, thus tracing a performative trajectory from O'Neill to James. Increasingly, Brutus Jones and Toussaint Louverture blurred into one another, demonstrating the performative citationality between representations of Black diasporic power and what Joseph Roach has called genealogies performance throughout the circumAtlantic. So to the Museum of the City of New York, this was an O'Neill play. And the photo could only be from it. There's the cover of the book. Robeson's emperor cemented his authority as a cultural regnant, opening up a circumAtlantic critique of imperial power. From the start, Brutus Jones, as performed by Robeson, had flash, citing Black diasporic power and Black American icons. In 1924, when he assumed the role, Robeson wore a light-colored, military-style, tailor-made jacket with gilded epaulettes and fringe, gold braiding, chevrons, brass buttons, and embroidered details on the sleeve. This was a departure from the heavy, dark, mid-thigh length coats that Gilpin had worn, which had almost no trim or medals, with the exception of this CSA buckle that he wore. And you can't really see it, but right here. So Robeson, I write about this in the book, and I can talk about it more in the Q&A. He added the initial CSA on the buckle, which stands for, I had to look it up, but does anyone know?
Confederate States of America.
Yes, who? Bonus for you. Confederate Sons of, why would a Black American wear something that is citing the Confederate Sons of America? States, excuse me, states. That he owns it and conquered it. I mean, is it a way to show through lines between various kinds of oppressive regimes of power? And can Brutus Jones even inhabit that? And remember, he learns his bad business practices while he's a Pullman porter from the white businessmen. So he's entering into that. And I thought it was so interesting that even when he had stripped off, Jones takes off his coat and his shirt and everything, at the very end of the play, Gilpin is still wearing that buckle as a nod, I think, to the citationality of that power. But who was Robeson citing? I think throughout his performances, we can see emperors across the Black diaspora, such as Toussaint Louverture, Guillaume Sam, Marcus Garvey, he's American, but we can talk more about that, and Henri Christophe. But as Toussaint Louverture, the Negro Napoleon, as one caption described him, Robeson wore a French blue emperor jacket and a Napoleon hat. Production photos no longer show Brutus Jones' gun, but rather a sword, substituting 20th century technology with that of the early 19th. Crucially, Robeson had planned to include Toussaint Louverture along with the Emperor Jones as part of his anticipated Black repertory theater in London. That's another role he performed that is very citational. In a piece he wrote, I Want Negro Culture, Robeson wrote that theater should be the first step in winning freedom over expression. Through theater, he maintained, we aim to win world recognition for Negro productions and so help the Negro back to self-respect. I intend to shortly launch this theater in the West End. Now, Robeson did not propose to limit the repertoire only to Black theater because he included O'Neill in that. But he did have his sights on a mix of European classics and plays that were purely African, as he put it. But the theater never emerged, likely due to the Depression, the war, and then of course his passport was withheld. And what I want to note is that even in Robeson's front page obituary in the New York Times in 1976, his roles as Brutus Jones and Toussaint Louverture were mentioned as standout performances. The African-American newspaper, the Chicago Defender, wrote, "It is easy to understand why Paul Robeson is the most beloved and greatest of theater artists we have ever produced. Robeson is an artist fighter for Negro America. Robeson is more than an ambassador for his people. He sings for freedom." And I would like to suggest that Robeson's embodiment of both artist and fighter was coterminous with performing the Emperor Jones. So my second example is another archival error. And what do you see here? Don't be shy.
Cowboy boots?
Yeah. Good. So we have the boots, the Brutus Jones boots, but I'm seeing more fringe and maybe more pointy. What else do you see?
Holster for the pistol.
Holster for the pistol. To me, it looks like it's right up here, right? Usually like Robeson and the Americans had them kind of slung down around the hips. Does he look American to you?
Kind of Italian. The
Russian.
the holster and belt being worn like that, reminiscent, I think, of the Italian army.
Yeah. Or French. Yeah. Yeah. So as I encountered this, now this is the Beinecke at Yale. And so it's Habib Banglia performing the Emperor Jones. So when I came across this, it captivated me when I found this in at Yale University, and it was not filed among O'Neill's papers, but rather, somewhat puzzlingly, in an African-American collection. The photo reveals an unheimlich, or uncanny image, where the familiar is seen as strange. The actor is immediately recognizable as Brutus Jones, the oversized epaulets extending off the jacket's shoulders like an armor. As always, a gun is strapped to the emperor's side, signaling imminent danger. If not, the mythical silver bullet that he will be his undoing. And yet something is unfamiliar about him as well, compared to other depictions of Brutus Jones, especially to Gilpin and Robeson, as I've shown you. His suit is slim-fitting with a short European cut. It's comprised of light fabric and matching white pants, hardly the bulky, looser-fitting jackets worn by Gilpin and Robeson. But the photo's uncanniness, together with its theatricality, highlights the intertwined and deeply deceptive ontology of imperial representation as performed by this colonial subject, thus unsettling the boundaries between the two. It also reveals the power of Banglia embodying these contradictions, for he is armed. Banglia's holster is cinched high about the waist, like a French gendarme. Armed African soldiers were familiar in the French colonial imaginary, as the New York Herald Evening Mail noted in its review. Quote, "The French, on the other hand, are used to African colonial troops, which they spell Troupes, who carry themselves proudly and with a gravity of demeanor that is impressive. The Freudian slip of using troops instead of troops, Troops, underscores my argument about the theatricality and performativity of imperial representations, both on and off the stage, as well as their unsettling effects. Benglia's intense glance to the side reveals the tension of what lurks outside the frame, piercing the photo with the force of Roland Barthes calls the punctum, the element which rises from the scene, that rare detail that grabs a viewer and causes her to see the image anew. So Benglia's sideward glance also alerts us to what cannot be captured in official publicity or archives, suggesting a productive space outside the dominant discourse for that which has not entirely been overridden by imperial power. Now, here's where the error comes in. The background in the photo, oh, let's see. So this is where you get some of the publicity text here that talks about it, that goes out. The background, but I'm going to go back to this one so we can see it more clearly. The background in Benglia's photo highlights its theatrical artifice to suggest the fraudulent ontology of empire. The lush curtains spilling onto the floor behind Benglia gives way to walls and everyday furniture in the room, visually interrupting the photographic containment. The shimmering curtain also emphasizes the constructed nature, not only of Brutus Jones, but also the imperial qualities themselves. Benglia's photo, moreover, reveals how a performer's identity is unstable, with contradictory and ambiguous qualities. Benglia positions himself stiffly in front of the fabric. It is not a proscenium curtain, but rather a drape in front of a large window or a French door. Not quite a theatrical set, but also not a theatrical set, to use Richard Schechner's phrase. The background hovers in a liminal space between O'Neill's scripted mise-en-scène and the photographer's studio, simultaneously revealing role and actor, emperor and subject, colonizer and colonized. At a moment when North African actors inhabited only one side of those binaries in European theater, typically performing demeaning roles, Benglia's simultaneous embodiment of both emperor and colonized subject unsettled the imperial project both on and off stage. And what I'm getting at here is, he's Algerian, right? Which was a French colony. So he's performing it on French soil. So I was really interested in that performative citationality of undoing colonizer and colonized. The photo, moreover, provides insight into its futurity because Benglia would reprise this role in Paris 27 years later on the cusp of the Algerian War. So his posing for this publicity photo can be seen as a way of anticipating his future look, to borrow Harvey Young's work on enslaved people who pose for daguerreotypes. Performing stillness for this camera invites recognition of Benglia's own future body, not only as a photographic subject, anticipating its documentation, but also as a performing artist who would reprise the role of Brutus Jones in 1950. So he founds this all-Black theater company in Paris, and what production do they choose to inaugurate their season? Jones. I mean, it's 1950, so there's more that could have been chosen, but they chose this play. As an artifact misplaced in the archive, the photo thus serves as a dissonant imperial representation and points to its unsettled colonial epistemology. Jumping from its incorrect indexing, it does not belong to African-American photography, and to improper cartographic placement. Benglia was North African, not African-American. His photo also jumps temporality with its paradoxical liveness. It looks back and forth in time to pre-French rule in Algeria, and forward to the Battle of Algiers. From the 1920 premiere of The Emperor Jones in the US to the 1923 premiere in Paris. From a Parisian National Theater to Benglia's own Montparnasse Club, where he performs The Witch Doctor from The Emperor Jones.
I think you got ahead of slide.
Awesome, thank you. So he had his own club in Montparnasse in Paris, and he would perform this nightly. And it's, you look at that, and if you know the play, you know it's The Witch Doctor from The Emperor Jones. So suggesting that there are connections among these temporal, racial, and cartographic coordinates. Okay, this is an archival find. And I want to end my talk with this discovery, which is from my last chapter in the book called Black to Ireland. As I was researching the Emperor Jones 1933 film version, I was struck that the film was cut differently for distinctive audiences: Northern, Southern, white, and also Black audiences. And the film, though, was created by a team of Irish-American artists. O'Neill, Murphy, Dudley Murphy was the director, and Dudley Diggs. And so what I want to suggest is that the Emperor Jones came to a commitment to the idea that the colonization of Ireland shared synergies with the results of anti-Black racism, colonialism, and imperialism, although not similar, as a way of negotiating their own contested relationship with legitimating structures in white US culture. And O'Neill had a track record of creating works that featured Black life as a way of negotiating his own Irishness, at a time when Irish Americans were just beginning to be seen as white. And as we know, whiteness has been an arbitrary racialized category whose ontological parameters have shifted over the years. While the Irish were an oppressed race, and Ireland, observes Noel Ignatieff, I hope I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, and how the Irish became white. Once they immigrated to America, they were seen as racialized minorities until they inched their way towards whiteness. And all of those processes of de-rathination that Ronan was talking about. So I want to skip to an example of this film version of The Emperor Jones from 1933. It was believed to have been lost to us, but I found it. It was hidden in plain sight in an archive in Canada. And I want to show you a couple of things that I'm going to wrap up a little quickly here, and how the film worked to do several things, and really to focus on the Black House version. As I began to view it next to the Library of Congress restored version, I noticed that some things were happening like flips, little seconds. And what I realized is that things were being cut out. The first thing that happened is the fight scene between Brutus Jones and Jeff was significantly cut. And in particular, like, it's shorter, but also close up of the weapon and everything had been cut out. And with these excisions, Black on Black violence was tamed, as well as images of African-American men wielding weapons, thus disallowing stereotypes about Black male criminality. The second thing that was cut from the Black House version was at the end of the scene where Bruce Jones accidentally kills Jeff, his former friend, is that at the end, a police officer comes in, and Steve McQueen, the film historian, has read this as an Irish cop as well. So why cut that? The excision of the officer rewrites the narrative so that there was no police intrusion into an African-American space. And with a 21st perspective, 21st century perspective. It also suggests that entanglements between police and the Black community were problematic long ago. The next noteworthy scene is the quarry scene from the Emperor Jones. Quarry scene, you might be asking yourself. So all these things that I've just talked about obviously aren't in the play, The Emperor Jones. It was part of this elaborate backstory that the screenwriter Du Bois Hayward added almost an hour to the film to flesh it out a little. So here we see a symbol, as I'm reading it anyway, of strength, pride, and endurance. And this powerful image was used on lobby cards and promotional materials. Holding a sledgehammer and singing with his booming baritone voice, Robeson is the epitome of strength and talent. And moreover, a low angle shot grants him a sense of authority, making him appear larger than life. Now, the camera work does not treat the prison guard in the same way. And when he commands Jones to beat the prisoner, the camera is at eye level, not granting him the same power. So I want to show you what happens in the film version, a live cut here.
Open it up. Open it up. Sleep, eh? Well, I'll learn him how to run away. Wake him up.
Well, if I lay my hands on that boy, the Lord will strike me dead.
Don't take orders, eh? Oh. Oh.
Do you see it? There's that awkward jump cut. He raises the shovel up and it just goes blue. And I call this a racialized jump cut because, you know, when my students see this, they think that's an editing mistake, right? But it was clearly done post-production. And unfortunately, the footage of that is lost to us forever. I can talk about other things that were put back in by the Library of Congress. It was too volatile to see for a Black character to hit and fight back against white power. And so it's just like a very, very odd jump cut. The race cut is it reads like an editing mistake. And even the producers said this in 1933. The idea of a Black man attacking a white man was cool. We don't see him hit the prison guard, but we can guess he has done so, for the film skips ahead to Jones fleeing while the guard lies lifeless on the ground. So about 8 seconds of film are gone in this Black House version, including, well, this is not the Black House version. You know, when the white guard is beating Bruce Jones, they cut that out too. So I just want to skip ahead to show you some other things that were cut. Oh, I have to go back to this. Okay. When we get to now O'Neill's play, the flashbacks, when O'Neill has the hallucinations, well, how is a film going to do it? So they shot it with this azure lens, which Library of Congress had to restore. But here in the hallucination, he actually does kill the guard. And it's filmed as a double exposure. I can talk more about that in the Q&A. But I argue that the reason why they allowed that version to be in is because it's hard to see, it's a hallucination, it's a double exposure, but he not only hits him over the head, he shoots him with a gun. So I read that as kind of as a radical moment. Other cuts, The regrettable use of the M word, there are 33 instances in the film, were all cut out of the Black House version at the request of Black audiences who said, wait a minute, this is not acceptable. And they recut the film, and it was really then more positively received. Finally, and most egregiously, the middle passage scene was cut out. In other words, the middle passage is when enslaved people were brought over on the boats, right? And this was cut from a lot of versions. I can talk more about that. But it was done post-production because there is a still of it that we have. And I found this in the Archive of the Crisis, which was the African-American periodical that I talked about. And I read this as an alternative archive here. So it was cut from the film, but the publication decided to put it in there, I think, as something to provide a different kind of archive. To conclude, I hope these examples of findings in the archive, whether misfiled, misplaced, or hidden in plain sight, give you a sense of the vital necessity of collections like the Hammerman Collection. Both archives and repertoires are vital to the work we do as scholars, librarians, researchers, and theater artists. The Hammerman Collection is a wonderful archival trove for us to better understand performances of the past, to read between the archival gaps and errors. And I, for one, am incredibly grateful to archives such as this to help me tell the story of racing the Great White Way. So thank you very much.
It's about 15 minutes for Q&A.
Okay. Any questions?
I just want a clarification in my mind because I may have said it, but when you're saying the black something cutting, this cut version of the Emperor Jones, is this also the Canadian version you're talking about?
Yeah, well, and it's, yes.
I mixed the names up there.
I'm calling it the Black House version.
Black House, that's what
yeah, and it's not labeled as that, but they have a 76-minute version and a 72-minute version. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And as I looked at what was taken out, I realized that's what it is. So it's not labeled that way. Yeah. Yes.
Quick question about the outfits, the costumes that they were wearing. How much control did the actors have over what costumes was that something they participated in with the costume designers and directors and things?
Oh, that is such a good question. Well, if you look at Gilpin, he really, that was his decision for the CSA, buckle on his costume. And that was like 1920, the Provincetown Players. They didn't have a lot of money for scenery or costumes. They did that big cyclorama for the Emperor Jones that broke them financially, actually. So I think it was sort of scrappy things, but it was, I think, just sort of a standard kind of thing that they adapted. But I don't know how much Robeson kept adding, although I do know when he performed in 1939, he started wearing a cowboy hat during the Depression era. So I think he was trying to fit into certain kind of time periods there. Yeah.
Didn't Gilpin conflict with O'Neill over the use of the M-word? And did Robeson have the same issue?
Yes and no. So Gilpin famously said, I created that role of the Emperor Jones, that Irishman, he just wrote it. And what he did is he literally rewrote the play, especially while on tour, and he took out every instance of the M word while performing it. And he would say like baby or sugar baby or, Negro. He would substitute more appropriate language. And I always thought that Robeson didn't do that because he does say all 33 instances on the film version. But then in my research, I found that he started rewriting it and taking it out into like the late 20s and the early 30s. So he did also remove it. And he's never been credited for that in any of the research I've uncovered. Yeah.
O'Neill was a merchant seaman, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting that the first case we have in American literature of a minority, a colored person with agency is in Moby Dick, Queequeg. And what Melville and O'Neill have in common is both under the mask, you know, merchant seaman. Yeah. And so there's a really interesting work that has been done on how the merchant seamen were, since the 18th century, a highly integrated society. That is, that there were Native Africans, there were African Americans, there were Polynesians, a wide variety of people of different cultures, and that created a very, very interesting cross-Atlantic kind of culture in those ships. And it would give him, like it did Melville, a sense of these individuals have agency, have control of lives, and are powerful individuals.
Yeah, that is so important. And I think it really did shape O'Neill and how he was trying to give them, you know, round them out three-dimensionally. And this is why we see those characters in Thirst. We see them in, I think, Fog, is it? Or I'm confusing that with Thirst, but, you know, suddenly you have these, you know, Polynesian or West African, let's say, or Haitian characters. It's because he did encounter them when he was at sea.
As you mentioned earlier, also Moon of the Caribbees.
Moon of the Caribbees, yeah.
Which ties in directly to what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who did Gilpin direct then when he directed Emperor Jones?
Himself. It's like Tom Cruise, or, you know, I'll be in it and direct myself. Yeah.
So for directing on Broadway, was he able to change it to Sweet Baby? Yeah,
you know, it wasn't a long run. It was in 1926. And it wasn't even reported as a, you know, monumental event, which sort of shocked me. So there's not a lot of stuff on it, but I think people recognized it as Gilpin's sort of what he had been doing all along. Maybe he added more stuff to it, but I haven't been able to find that much in the reviews. Yeah.
I'm still hung up on Gilpin's belt buckle.
That
seems to be a detail that the audience couldn't have seen. So Gilpin and other members of the cast and crew are probably the only ones who knew about that.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Well, it was a small theater, and when he did it, let's see if we can get back to him. So, and we've been inside that theater.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
There he is.
You know, and you're right, it's slightly like covered up, but when he's standing up, you can see a little better. Maybe not. Yeah, out of focus. So, you know, I can tell you, I've seen the costume on display at the Museum of the City of New York, and you can't see it. But again, it could just be one of those tiny little things that maybe was just for him, you know, until people picked up on it.
Was the uniform gray? I mean, there were people who were, there were Confederate soldiers still alive in 1920s.
Well, yeah, it was.
They would remember. They would have seen that uniform and
interesting.
And maybe thought of that.
Yeah, kind of a dark gray. Yeah, which is why when you see Robeson, then you know he's in a lighter color earlier on. Then he goes dark again. You know, it's sort of interesting. Why go from one to the other?
It reminds me of the saying that came out of the Emancipation, which was bottom rail, top rail, now boss. And so in a sense, it's the seizure of that power.
Yeah, and also perhaps you know, Homi Bhabha has this notion of mimicry, where you mimicry of colonial discourse, where you can put on the trappings, but with a critical sort of edge to it. And that's what I argue Gilpin does, that he adds that certain, like, you see what I'm wearing here, but I'm doing something different with it. Sure.
This is a thought, but I'm interested in the question about, you mean the actor could design the costume? And I think, you know, what you said about these are sometimes come from almost what we call unprofessional or non-professional circumstances before they finally are into Broadway and unions and everything else. And, you know, in the theater, you're assigned a costume and you don't say a thing about it. You know, if the boots are too tight, you try to hide that as much as you can until you're tortured, and then you go to the designer. But when you have actors in certain positions, for instance, Gilpin, who I think O'Neill, and they may have fired him eventually, but
They did.
he
fired him.
He was undisciplined and alcoholic, and obviously a strong ego there.
Well, sounds like O'Neill.
Oh, absolutely, but O'Neill thought he felt I think he was his favorite, Jones, but that he just was an undisciplined person. And we know O'Neill was fighting with that all the time, including his own family. But the actor can sometimes campaign to get something in, you know. And that other photo is not from the production. It seems to be the photo in France of Habib. Yeah, that it seems to be just one of those production, or not a production photo, but just like backstage. Or they just, you know, took it for advertisement purposes or something. But again, we don't know the level of, you know, union presentation and everything else that was involved in this. He may have created his own costume.
Well, it's 1923. Let's keep that in mind. And now what's going to happen with Habib Bengli is what happened to Robeson and Gilpin. He died far too early because of his alcoholism. But this would launch his international stage and film career. He was in dozens of films in French cinema, you know, and so it's 1923. It's from the French archive, you know, French/Algerian, and he just started with that, and then it's not like he was a nobody. He became exceedingly famous so that he could found his own theater company in Paris 27 years later. One more question?
Just a quick comment. I mean, not that I'm any expert, but 35 years as an actor, and often we collaborate with our costume designer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, it depends on your status.
Depends on the level of union you're in, or, you know, or what is it, union, non-union, what, you know, it just depends. But of course, you've got two examples. You've got three great actors, but I'm not familiar with this gentleman. But the other two people, wouldn't you want them in your production if they thought they needed something? You'd do everything you could to get it for them, you know.
Yeah, they of course had it.
Yeah,
I think so.
and you're starting at Provincetown Players, which is
right. They're no
amateur.
unions.
This is
right.
amateur.
They're amateur. They're
Yeah.
no unions.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was such an honor to be here and to speak. So thank you so much.